Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young, licensed clinical social worker. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there! To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome to episode 23. This is a great episode chock full of information about narcissism and how they impact HSPs, highly sensitive people. First, I just want to thank each and every one of you. The podcast hit 10,000 downloads this last week. The podcast isn't even 5 months old yet, and so you guys are doing an amazing job of sharing this podcast with other people. The growth is just amazing, and I'm incredibly grateful for each and every one of you, so thank you very much. Dr. Jones is the guest today. She does not identify as a highly sensitive person. We're talking about narcissistic traits, but out of the sake of simplicity for this introduction, I'm going to refer to it as narcissism, but once you listen to the episode, Dr. Jones talks about the percentage of people that actually have a diagnosis of narcissism, yet people have lots of traits of narcissism. In this episode, Dr. Jones defines what is narcissism. What does it look like in a relationship, whether you're in a relationship with a romantic partner or you have a parent who has narcissistic traits? Gaslighting, what is it? There's also a pretty clear connection between narcissists and highly sensitive persons. And we talk about this between partners and parents who are narcissistic with an HSP partner or child. The HSP is often the scapegoat in the family. There may be a golden child, and the children are often pitted against each other in these types of families. If you have a parent who is narcissistic, the highly sensitive child often feels guilty and believes what the narcissistic parent tells them. You're too sensitive, you're too selfish, you never call me, you don't care. Once people understand about narcissism, they see that the limitation is in the parent, not in the HSP. Dr. Jones also talks about when a narcissist enters a room, the energy in the room changes. And when the narcissist leaves the room, you can also feel the energy shift. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Jones. Dr. Natalie Jones, PsyD, LPCC, is a licensed professional clinical counselor and a postdoctoral intern. She currently has a private practice called Lifetime Counseling and Consulting in California, where she specializes in working with women who've been in emotionally and psychologically abusive relationships with narcissists, as well as with individuals who were previously incarcerated for various crimes. Dr. Jones has a podcast called A Date with Darkness, which specializes in providing education and tips from healing from narcissistic relationships. Dr. Jones has also written blogs for the Mind Journal and Psych Central. I had a really challenging time editing this episode, and my editing skills are kind of limited. You're going to hear some clicking and a number of other imperfections. Because this episode has so much amazing information, I really had to go with the premise of done is better than perfect. My hope is that this gives you permission to not allow your perfectionism to hold you back. We often have amazing things to create in the world, and if we can't get it perfect, we don't do it. If you find yourself getting annoyed and being judgy, it's totally okay. But my guess is that you also hold yourself to a very high standard, and I just invite you to look at how's that working for you. All right, and on to the episode. Hey, Dr. Jones, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for having me. I appreciate you inviting me on to the show to talk with you and your listeners about a very important topic.
I'm really fascinated and kind of excited. I feel like it's not okay to be excited, but I am. I'm excited to know about the dynamic because I have so many clients that have a parent or a partner who's narcissistic, and I know that the pairing up between HSPs and people with either narcissism or narcissistic tendencies is pretty high. So can you introduce yourself to the listeners and let us know a little bit about what you do and why it's so important to you?
Absolutely. So my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I'm based out of California. And I have two separate roles in which I currently work right now. One is private practice, and the other one is in the criminal justice system. In the criminal justice system, I specialize in working with folks who commit crimes, specifically and typically crimes against people. Those are folks with usually diagnoses or personality disorders, I should say, such as antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. I work with those folks. And then in my private practice, I work specifically with African American women who have been in relationships that are traumatic or hurtful, and they've experienced quite a bit of what we call now narcissistic abuse. So I work with both ends of the spectrum. I am a licensed professional clinical counselor, and I'm currently in the last phase or last steps of getting my licensure as a psychologist in California.
That's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, thank you.
How did you get interested in this?
It was a combination of education, training, personal life experiences, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but when you're going through grad school, Patricia, grad school was like one of the hardest times of my life. And my relationships started to become a lot more clear to me as I started to shift my focus and grow up. And I started to see a lot of things in my personal relationships. There was a trend, and it was a trend that I didn't like. And so I did quite a bit of work to try to understand and try to change what was happening. And I found that a lot of my relationships had narcissistic traits or characteristics to it. And it just felt very toxic to me, very hurtful to me. In addition to that, a lot of my training and working with different sectors, I mean, you name it, I've done it, from inpatient to outpatient to partial hospitalization to substance abuse, residential, crisis residential, so on and so forth. A lot of the folks who have different struggles, whether it be mental health, whether it be substance abuse, or a combination of the two, also have experienced or are typically the aggressor, but they've experienced narcissistic abuse in their relationships. And so that was a chief complaint. When folks come to me, they don't necessarily complain that, hey, I'm experiencing narcissistic abuse. What they tend to do is they come to describe the feelings that they're experiencing and also the behaviors and things that they're experiencing in the relationships, which fit the criteria of narcissistic abuse. And so that's another segue, and a lot of theories and things that we learn about in school. A lot of them talk about early childhood experiences, narratives, objects of our affection, and how we develop these identities or these schemas over time. And so, again, using those series and applying it to what people are hurting from or what people are experiencing in combination with my own extension of my experiences is really what led to that.
That's really common, I think, for many of us. The term that I use for me, and I'm not putting this on you, is a wounded healer.
Yeah.
Things that I experienced that really impacted my development and then had to really work hard to do healing from. I really get what it's like for people that struggle with the things that I struggle with. And it sounds like there's some similarity. I don't want to put anything on you that doesn't fit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I definitely think that's how it works I think you're correct. And that's how it works for most therapists or specialists, right? And who better to provide guidance or assistance in someone who's gone through that, gone through the training, and has done the work to overcome and can understand your experiences. Absolutely.
Sure. So let's start with, what are some of the feelings that, if you have women that are coming to you and they're in relationships where there's narcissistic abuse, what are the things that they tell you they're experiencing and that they're feeling?
Very common symptoms, I'll start with things like anxiety and depression, right? And I think I did a show on my show called Anxious in Love, which characterizes it beautifully. Women experience anxiety in their relationship, being that they're not necessarily sure of where they stand or what's going on, or they may feel like they cannot talk with their partner about serious problems that are coming up in the relationships, or get answers to their questions that they may have about issues in the relationship. So there's a lot of ambivalence around problem solving or understanding where the relationship is going or if it's going anywhere, and having that feeling like, I just don't want to rock the boat and I don't understand. Is it me? What is it about me that this person can't commit or can't have these discussions? Or how can I be a better partner to serve the needs of my partner? And these women are wanting to do more work, but they're also wanting to find the answers to get clarity and to progress their relationships. And oftentimes what they're doing is they are internalizing, which is where the anxiety comes from. They're internalizing ambivalence around their future because their partner isn't meeting their emotional needs. However, they are less reticent to say, you know, my partner isn't meeting my emotional needs. Perhaps that's something that I need to look at and make a decision. No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to internalize and say, oh, there's something more that I should be doing, or what am I not doing correctly?
So what I hear you saying is, and tell me if I'm hearing you correctly, is that there's not a feeling of security in the relationship and the feeling that there's something missing or something wrong, walking on eggshells. And then I think it's really common as women that we tend to make things about ourselves, and especially if we have wounding from childhood, we almost always go back to, what have I done that's wrong and what can I do to fix it? And
Absolutely.
we lack that ability to see like, maybe this isn't me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Or I mean, and they may have that ability to do that, but there's a sense of denial. They're not ready to take it there yet, because typically what happens when they're coming to me, they're wanting to work on them. They're not ready to take a hardcore look at, perhaps it's not you, it's your partner. And so there needs to be some empowerment going on, and definitely some reflection, and just being an objective person to hold space to say, this is what I see. So yes, you are correct in some of the things that you've mentioned as well.
Yeah. It makes sense to me too, that if you're still at that stage where you think it's about you, then you're not going to be looking at your partner, the relationship. That's part of why people come to therapists, to uncover, and we help people examine what their relationships are looking like so they can make choices about what they want to do. So it just makes sense to me.
Absolutely. And, typically what I've experienced is that this is a very familiar narrative and pattern. And so this is something that folks who are coming to see me have done in their relationship without being aware that they're doing it, that where they've just kind of internalized. So it's something that's happening in multiple relationships usually. And it could even still be going on in multiple relationships. And that could be a relationship with your job. That could be your relationship with food. It could be a relationship with family members. It could be your relationship with sexual intimacy. It typically shows up in multiple areas. It's not just a one-off linear thing, and it's usually a behavior that's very ingrained in their behavior and how they show up in the world and in their relationships.
And it makes sense to me that if we aren't seen and valued as children, if our feelings aren't mirrored, if we're not taught how to self-regulate, how to meet our needs, that we're valued, that we're precious, how to say no, if we never learn that, then how can we know that that's what we're supposed to have in relationships? Because we just look for what we had or didn't have in those relationships that were modeled to us as children. It just makes sense to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what is a narcissist? What would we see? What does it look like? And in addition to giving the qualities, can you make it a person? I mean, even if you're putting more than one characteristic so that we paint a picture of what this would look like if someone were walking and breathing narcissism.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important to distinguish between a person who has narcissistic traits, which is what we are talking about here, versus someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder occurs in 1 to maybe 2% of the population, and therefore is pretty rare. And it's usually your most extreme case of narcissism. And I typically see folks like this in the criminal justice system, but not too much in private practice. Most people are talking about, when they talk about narcissistic partner or narcissistic abuse, they're talking about someone who has narcissistic traits, and traits can often occur on a spectrum, right? Mild, medium to moderate to severe. If we're looking at someone who has narcissistic traits, some of the traits that I will name off, and I'm going to put this in very layman's terms and try not to use clinical verbiage here so your audience can understand that.
And so the host understands too. Thank you.
So one of the characteristics is them having a godlike or superior complex, which means that they feel like they're better than you, or they are above you and everyone else, or they're in their own special category. And also, too, what that means is this can also demonstrate things like hypocrisy, which means that the rules that they have, or the rules only apply to you and not them because they're special or above you, so they can do whatever they want to. There's also the objectification. Objectifying means that everything is considered property, right? Including you or person or whatever. So you are my personal property, or you are an extension of me, and therefore I will do with you what I please to, right? And you can't make any decisions in the relationships unless those decisions fall in line with my decisions. That also gives them control. That also leads to the element of danger when someone tries to walk away or leave the relationship, because if you are considered to be personal property, you cannot leave the relationship until they discard you on their term. They also only want to be considered special or beautiful. They consider themselves, again, to be in a rank above other people. They also only will consider, surrounding themselves with other people that are in a league of superiority, which they consider themselves to be. This is not necessarily a rational decision, meaning that that person doesn't necessarily have to be superior or have superior accolades or anything like that. They just feel like they do, and therefore they can only surround themselves with other people that they consider to be superior as well. There's also the manipulation, and the manipulation can take place in a variety of ways, right? Because if they are entitled and manipulative, that means that they're going to use people for personal or secondary gain. So that means that I'm going to get from you what I need from you, and that's it. One of the most important key factors is the lack of empathy. What they tend to do is they mimic empathy in the beginning of the relationship. So that's how a lot of people get like bamboozled is that they thought that their partner expressed empathy at one point in time, and then once they get down the road in the relationship, they realize that they don't. So there's a lot of mimicry involved in those emotions. And then there's also some debate around whether or not people with narcissistic traits can actually show empathy. Latest research that I've read is that they can, they just choose not to. So it's an emotion that they choose not to express. There's also the feeling of emptiness, emotional emptiness for people. So they really don't care what happens to people. And again, that can go into empathy. And that usually shows up definitely in the more moderate to severe range as well. You start to see some of those characteristics there. I think I've named quite a few there, but I think the arrogance, the selfishness, the manipulation, and then once you start to get into pathology, there's other things that you will see that will kind of factor into those elements, such as jealousy, rage, envy, stalking behaviors at some point, just to try to maintain control. And I think that's the other piece too, is that they're always trying to maintain the control of the relationship. Then they can employ a variety of tactics in order to do so, such as gaslighting behaviors and things like that.
Let's talk about gaslighting. Can you explain it? Can you give some definitions, and can you talk about how the person who's on the receiving end of gaslighting feels?
Absolutely. I've done a couple of shows on this very recently, including yesterday. Gaslighting, a lot of people ask me what that is. Short and sweet, simplified definition of gaslighting is brainwashing, psychological brainwashing. That's the short and sweet version. Long version of the definition is that gaslighting is manipulating someone psychologically to question their own perception, their own reality, and their own experiences. So I'm going to employ whatever tactics I can use to make you question what you've experienced, what you've seen, what you've heard, and what you've felt. And I'm going to make it so that you don't even trust your own self anymore. You don't even trust your own perception. And I liken it to being in like the Twilight Zone or something like that.
In a personal relationship, can you give some specific examples like of what somebody would say or feel like is really relatable on a personal level?
Absolutely. So if you want to talk about gaslighting on a smaller scale, like in a relationship, which is something that's done even on a daily basis for some folks, one thing that I'd like to mention as an element of gaslighting that people commonly experience is triangulation. Or, for example, what will happen is the partner with narcissism will try to triangulate with their partner. So they'll try to bring in a third party to be on their side or back them up, back up their opinion. So, for example, if you say, "Oh," to your partner, I saw you in town with some other woman yesterday at the market." And your partner says, "No, no, you didn't. You're crazy. And I'm going to bring my mother in to back me up and confirm that A, you're crazy, and B, that there's no way you could have seen me. So something is really wrong with you," right? So they're bringing in another person to kind of hammer home their point and also to gain the upper hand in the relationship and in the discussion. And they're bringing in a third party person to say that, one, that you're crazy or that you're not believable. So that they're trying to weaken your perception by having people sort of back them up and side with them, decreasing your ability to defend or to be objective in the conversation, if that makes sense.
That's perfect. Can you give a couple more examples? Just because I really love to to have it look, what would it look like in a relationship? So that was perfect. Can we have a couple more?
Absolutely. So another example of gaslighting is you complimenting and degrading in the same sentence. So this is one example of saying, "Wow, you look really great today, but those pants make you look really fat." Right? So that's kind of helping to it's really a psychologically abusive tactics to compliment but degrade in the same sentence, I guess you could say. Another example would be to change the topic or have a different discussion when you try to bring problems to the table. Again, I saw you at the market yesterday with this other woman. I believe that you're cheating on me. This is what you would say to your narcissistic partner. So you're trying to have a discussion here about a problem, a significant issue in the relationship. They're going to want to deflect, blame, or not problem solve at all. And the way that they do this is they now shift the topic. No, you didn't. And you wouldn't have seen me or possibly have seen me at the market if you were doing all of the things that you need to do in our relationship, right? So now they're shifting the conversation and saying that you are somehow at fault or flawed for problems that are occurring. And so now we've shifted to what you saw in a serious trust or boundary issue to you are the one who's causing problems in this relationship. We wouldn't even need to have this discussion if you were the perfect partner.
I love that. Say there's an event that's coming up and maybe it's important to the person who's got the narcissistic tendencies and not so much to the other partner. And so the other partner says, I'm not that interested in going. How would somebody that has narcissistic traits typically respond to something like that?
Oh, they're going to lash out. So if it's something that they want to do, they're probably going to lash out. They are probably going to degrade or berate someone, which means that they're going to talk down to you. They may call you a bunch of names. They may accuse you of not being personally interested in them, being jealous of them, not being supportive of them. And they may have a full out tantrum, as I like to call it, an adult tantrum, to try to get you to sway your mind. And so that's going to be met with anger and rage, and they're going to take it as a personal slight or sign of disrespect against them.
Yeah, one of the things that I hear an awful lot, so I'm giving you like the tidbit and then I want you to take it and run with it, is the non-narcissistic person, doesn't have the traits, tries to set limits for themselves, and the partner or the parent constantly feeds back to them how selfish they are, how they're not caring. And this person is doing everything that they can to get healthy and to create some limits, but is constantly being told how selfish and inconsiderate and unthoughtful they are. And then they start to believe it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Right. And I definitely think that that's another element there, gaslighting, right? Degrading, right? Because you have to remember when you're in a relationship with a narcissistic partner, they want control, complete control of you. And there's also the hypocrisy element, right? So the same thing that it's like a projection. The same things that they're doing is what they're actually projecting onto you. So they are being selfish. They are the ones who are degrading, but they're projecting it onto you because they want to feel special. They want to suck every ounce of energy out of you to make themselves feel special. And that energy can either be positive or negative, which is why you have a lot of the tantrums. This is why you have a lot of the showdowns on the holidays or special occasions, because this needs to be about me, right? And it doesn't matter how I'm going to get it. I'm just going to get it. And I'm going to say that you're all these things in a way to get it and to make you feel bad and to make you doubt what you're doing for yourself and that make you not want to do anything for yourself, right? Because their objective is to make you totally 100% invested in them and not yourself and not in the problems of the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that makes sense. I hope I answered your question there.
You did. I had a fleeting thought and I lost it and I'm trying to get it back. I'm just going to let it go.
That happens.
It was something really, it felt like it was salient though. I'm just going to trust. So if someone is starting a relationship with someone who has narcissistic traits, is that something that you can spot from the beginning?
Absolutely. I've also done a show on this one, red flags in dating and relationships. And there's quite a few. You have to be very keen on looking for them and just also trusting your gut. So the number one red flag, one of the telltale signs of a narcissistic partner is inconsistent or tumultuous or very short-term relationships. They're just not very good at keeping relationships, or they're only keeping relationships around for their own personal benefit. And so what I will say in looking for red flags is looking at their relationship history, and that's across the board, right? Family, friend, a significant other, and look for certain themes in the beginning. So if someone has what I'd like to call the victim or the white knight syndrome, which means that they portray themselves as always being the victim or always being the savior in their previous relationships, this would look a little bit like, oh, my child's mother, I rescued her from everything and I did everything for her. And then she just walked out on me and took everything from me and just blah, blah, blah. And you start to see that theme show up in other areas. That's typically a red flag, especially when this person isn't taking any sort of accountability or responsibility for problems in the relationship or things like that. The second thing is if this person is too good to be true, they usually are. In fact, I haven't met a case where it's too good to be true, and it was. So that means that if this person is super charming, super good looking, does everything right to a T, there's usually something else going on there if you feel like they have zero flaws in the beginning. 3, there's usually a rush to get an end result. So people will often describe having a whirlwind romance where things have moved very quickly. So they may have had sex very quickly. They may have moved in together very quickly. They may have gotten engaged or had a child, had some serious life decisions that have taken place rather quickly. And it's not to say that all relationships that move quickly have a narcissistic partner, but these are just common themes I've seen in working with the folks that I've worked with. The fourth thing I will mention is there's a degree of secrecy around prior relationships or prior actions. So there may be, you might be in a relationship with this person and you feel like you don't know them or you don't know their support system or the people that have been in their lives completely. So you may feel like there's an element of secrecy or just like, I've been in a relationship with this person and I don't truly know them. They don't reveal their inner social workings or their social circle to you. And also too about their problems. They don't discuss too many problems with you unless they're wanting to put the feelers out to see what they can get from you. And more on that to come later. The other extreme would be is if they introduce you to everyone in their social circle or their immediate circle very quickly, and you seem to be insignificant to them. So this would look like, okay, this person is dating you, and then they decide to take you to a family gathering of some kind. And the family is just like, whatever, you're like one of 100 girlfriends that I've met already. And so that would be like, okay, that's a red flag that like this person has a history of having a lot of relationships, and so much so that their support system can't even take you very seriously, unfortunately. Yeah, I hope those are some. If you want, I can name additional.
Those are really clear. I love that. What types of people do narcissists tend to pair up with? We know that highly sensitive people, we know that's because highly sensitive people are full of empathy and caring, and they really can feed that sense of inadequacy that the person who's got the narcissistic traits, they're just a perfect match for each other. If you're able to say more about that, and if there are other types of people that tend to pair up, I'd love to hear about that.
Absolutely. I definitely think you're spot on. But just a general overview. If you're narcissistic, you typically want to pair up with someone that you can control. So a narcissist is not going to pair up with another narcissistic person, typically, or a person that's this on the narcissism scale as much as they are. It's high up on the narcissism scale. And so what they're going to do is they're going to pair up with people that are subjective to control. So these would be people that would have low self-esteem. These are people that have a significant history of trauma, right? Because one of the things that they like to do is they like to get in your mind, learn about your trauma, and then use that against you. So they may try to re-traumatize you based on some secret or vulnerability that you've shared with them. They are going to be paired up with people that are advantageous or that can be useful to them somehow. So if they feel like you have a nice large pocketbook and they feel like they can get close to you in your pocketbook so that you can spend their money on them, that you would be the perfect person to do that. They also, too, they like to align themselves with people, again, that they feel are of higher or greater status, right? And so they want to only associate themselves with people that are like that, even if there's no real association there. These might be people that like to name drop people that they don't actually even know, celebrities and such. There's also people that align themselves or surround themselves with people that are empathetic, right? And because with empathy, you can draw someone in, right? You can play on their heartstrings, you can discard them, and then come back in their lives at a later point, and that person is more likely to forgive you or want to, move past whatever differences the two of you had. Those would be some of the characteristic traits as well. People that they can pressure or they can subject to various things, people that they feel are going to be easy to isolate and to be under control. They definitely want to be in a position of power in the relationships. Whoever they feel like they can take immediate control over and be in power or authority in that relationship and subject to abuse is who they're going to do that with.
That was great. Thank you. If a person has a parent who's got narcissistic traits, what would that feel like to, at this point we're talking about an adult child, but can you just paint a little bit of a picture of what that would look like?
For the child or just for the adult or for the dynamics or what?
Well,
would you like?
I have a number of clients, and when we start talking, it really is evident to me that one of their parents has narcissistic traits. But because that's all that they've known, they don't know that there's anything else. So I guess what I'm imagining is if you could describe some of the things that somebody might feel, and because I work with highly sensitive people, I guess I'm hoping that they would go like, that sounds a little familiar to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I will say is that, some of the same stuff that we've talked about before definitely applies. But when you have a parent that is narcissistic, what you're going to have is you're going to have a parent that's not emotionally invested in you, your concerns, or problems that come up in the relationship. Right. And so what that means is this person is going to definitely be manipulative and say, they're kind of going to be, woe is me, or had it not been for me, you wouldn't be where you are type of. They're not going to be interested in trying to work with their children or talk with their children about problem solving. They're trying to get their needs met by using their authority. So what that would look like is that would be like something like, because I'm your mother. You have to financially support me over yourself because I'm your mother. And that's what you owe me because I'm your mother. So there's this obligation sense to treat that parent above all others. And then again, that parent is not emotionally invested in you and your concerns. So that may look like a parent that doesn't call or check in or is not really interested in your problems, or that parent may say something like, if you try to tell them about your problems, this may be a parent that would say that that's not a real problem. When I was your age, I had to do this and that and the other thing. Your problems are insignificant because my problems are way more significant than yours. So they'll try to outdo you, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That sense of competition. The child can never be the one that's suffering because the parent has suffered far and beyond whatever the child has experienced.
Absolutely. And that parent could definitely show up as being abusive, both physically, mentally, verbally, and definitely if they're sexually abusive. So that means that they're trying to take control and they violated all kinds of boundaries. If you are a child of a narcissistic parent, what you may try to do in order to maintain the relationship is what people do is they dissociate or they check out, right? So they try to just to even be in the room or spend the holiday with, they'll check out emotionally. They may turn the radio up. They may zone out during particular conversations, or they may keep things short and sweet. Another thing that narcissistic parents will do, they will degrade or name call. They won't acknowledge your accolades. So they'll definitely put you down, or they won't recognize or appreciate your accomplishments. I did mention the holidays, but I'll reference that again. So during holidays or special occasions, your parent may not show up. They may not acknowledge you, or they may use that opportunity to tell you that you're not good enough, or they may use that opportunity to do grandstanding where they're talking about themselves. Nobody else can measure up to them, or they may just cause a scene and completely destroy the holiday or special occasion. So that those could be some of the elements. And generally speaking, folks who have a narcissistic parent, they don't like their parents. They may feel, if they're in a relationship with them still, they may feel more of that obligation because they're my mom or because they're my dad. But they generally don't like their parents. It's very difficult emotionally for them to be around their parents or even to engage with their parents on any sort of level. One of the things that happens is that their parents typically pull energy from the room. And that's traditionally how you know that you're dealing with someone who has a personality disorder or strong personality disorder traits, is that the energy of the room changes upon this person's entry and departure. And typically when they're gone, the whole room is talking about them. And usually not in a very good way, like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened, or what's wrong with that person. Again, this parent typically shows up as very entitled. So this might be a parent that will come over to your house at any time because they feel like it, because I'm your parent. This might be a parent that comes inside your house and takes things without asking. This could be a parent that inserts themselves in your relationship. So they might call up your friends or significant other and insert themselves in trying to solve problems or have discussions about you without your knowledge or approval or consent. So that would be some of the things that I can think of. The other thing too is your parents might try to exploit you. I did a study with African American women who were psychologically abused by their parents while growing up. Some of the things that they mentioned, or some of the ways that they mentioned that they were exploited, was that their parents would get them to do things that they felt like the child could get away with, but they didn't want to take the risk in doing. So things would be like stealing, or writing bad checks for them, or going to other people and asking for money and lying about why they need it. Another way in which they felt exploited, a few of the women spoke on how their parents always wanted them to babysit the other children. And it was 24/7 nonstop. The other children in the household, it almost felt like they were their children as opposed to their mother's children.
Right.
So it was their responsibility to watch them, to take care of them, and for some of them, even to financially support them. And so that was another way in which they had to fulfill a financial obligation. Another way in which they were exploited and their parents stole from them. Most people who go to college in the United States, they have to get financial aid. There were a couple of scenarios in which their parents had forged some paperwork and had stolen their financial aid. The constant threat of abuse and or death to try to gain control. So if your parent is threatening to slap the crap out of you, or, I have no problem taking you out or killing you, or they're making threats of violence and or death like that, or they're violent with other people or animals or things like that in front of you just to prove a point and to make sure that you fall in line. That would be some of the more extreme cases, but also does happen quite a bit as well.
Yeah, what I often see showing up is the highly sensitive person in the family is usually identified as the black sheep, the disruptor, because they're the truth teller, but they also get labeled, you're so sensitive, you're always causing problems, you're too selfish. And the highly sensitive person really starts to believe that this is true. And because we get a lot of static for our sensitivity as it is, they really internalize it. It's a bad thing because obviously a narcissistic parent cannot embrace anybody else's strengths or gifts.
So there is the dynamic in the family. There's actually several dynamics. Dr. Susan Forward has spelled out some in her books, Toxic Families, and then Gagné and Bouchard did some as well in their 2004 study. But what you're speaking to is definitely the role as a scapegoat, and then where the child is blamed for all of the problems or everything that goes wrong. There's also the role of the golden child, where there's also another child in the family that is the most perfect, can do no wrong, and is held up on a pedestal. And oftentimes, a narcissistic parent, if there's more than one child, they will try to pit these two against each other, or pit all of the children against each other. And again, that's a way to maintain control. And it could be very ruthless at times as well. But yes, you typically can see where one child is blamed for all of the problems, degraded, put down. And yeah, it's just not a very good relationship. And again, triangulation typically tends to occur when you have a scapegoat, because that parent will try to collude with others or get others on their side to prove that this child is a troublemaker or shouldn't be a part of the family or should be ostracized.
Yeah. So if people are listening right now and they're going, this sounds a little bit too scary and too familiar, what are some steps that they can take and what are some resources?
So some steps that they can take is listening to podcasts like this one. There's other great podcasts out there on narcissistic abuse and other elements of narcissistic abuse, such as codependency, love addiction, and things like that, that they can also listen to. And I would certainly be happy to recommend a couple. I would recommend the Codependency No More podcast by Brian Pizer. My podcast is called A Date with Darkness. Some of the stuff that I like to read, I've already recommended. Toxic Families by Dr. Susan Forward. That's a great book. It's a classic book. There's some stuff by Claudia Black. She talked a lot about addiction and narcissism in the family. Again, those are classic books. Anything by Lundy Bancroft. Lundy happens to be a man. But one of the better books that I like of his is Why Does He Do That? Harriet Lerner has also written some great books. And some of the ones that I can think of are The Dance of Anger, The Dance of Intimacy, The Dance of Fear. And I like these books because it talks about, some of the things that we do when we get caught up in these relationships that don't necessarily serve a healthy purpose for us. It's that we focus on the end goal. We get caught up and we overlook or we deny the abuse because we're so focused on the end result being married or we have a child together. And this is how this story needs to play out for us. Dr. Harriet Lerner does a good job of tapping into emotions that we really need to wake up and be open to and express. Another great book is Women Who Love Too Much by Robin Norwood, also classic, but a great book. If you're ready to, I should say, to really take a hard look and see if someone in your life is truly, in fact, narcissistic and you want them to spell it out for you. A great author that I could recommend is H.G. Tudor. H.G., he's a self-proclaimed narcissist, and he talks about all of the down and dirty tricks that narcissists pull. So I cannot recommend him enough. However, it's really in your face. So I will say proceed with caution if you're not ready or you're not sure. I would say try some of the other books first because they're a lot more gentle. Whereas this is definitely, those kind of books would definitely want to cause you to confront your pain and just kind of collect your thoughts with that. There's a great YouTube channel. One of my favorites is Kim Saeed. But it's Saeed, Saeed, and she has a great YouTube channel. She has a great website.
That's great. Of all of these resources that you've given me, and thank you, that's a great listing. I'll put everything in the show notes. Are there any that are specific to if you have a mother who's a narcissist?
There is a book that I would recommend. It's called Surviving Mama by Dr. Pamela Thompson, and she is specifically speaking about women of color. There is Difficult Mothers and Adult Daughters by Karen Anderson, and also a classic author is Carol McBride, Will I Ever Be Good Enough? And also, too, Susan Forward wrote another book, and I forgot about this one, too. Because she's written a lot of good books. Mothers Who Can't Love, A Healing Guide for Daughters.
Okay, we've got reading material for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Oh, this is great. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
Is there anything else that is important to mention that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
I do think, what I'd like to say, and this can be controversial for people too, is that sometimes when we're in relationships with hurtful people, is that we go through phases when we leave those relationships with toxic people. And sometimes one of the phases that we can get caught up in or stuck in is overly identifying as the victim. right? And we start to say, well, this person did that to me, they did that to me, they did that to me. And what I'd like to say is that while people are manipulative and abusive, and I totally own that people can be, it's important not to get too caught up in the blame game, because what that will do is that can limit some of your work and your growth potential. Right. And I definitely cannot encourage therapy enough. Therapy, I think, would help you to open up and expand so that it's not all black and white, and to take a closer look at what's going on. Because what happens is when you overly identify or you project blame, those patterns have people in relationships like that will continue, because there's got to be a level of introspection in terms of looking at, okay, why am I in a relationship like this? What's got me caught up in a situation like this? And what did I take away, or what did I learn from this experience? And that doesn't happen until you go through your steps of your grieving process, if the relationship is or was abusive. And again, I'm not talking about children who were predatorized or whatever. I'm speaking more of like mutually exclusive romantic partner relationships. So I do want to clarify there. As we age, if we want to change our dynamics that occur in our relationships, particularly if our relationships don't serve us, we also want to take a look at how we can improve ourselves as well. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Are there any special, I get really focused, so I don't do a great job of acknowledging that you just gave me a great answer. I'm kind of on task here, so I'm just owning my I'm just want to get to the next thing.
Yeah.
Are there questions that a person would want to ask a therapist if they do recognize that maybe their parent is a narcissist, or they've been in a relationship with someone who is a narcissist? Would they want to find a therapist that has the background? And if so, what are some things that they would want to ask a potential therapist?
I definitely think you would want to ask someone that has a background in that, although it's not necessary. And I have to say that a lot of therapists don't have that. I've worked really hard at my specialization and gone out of the way to, definitely work with both ends of the spectrum. So I do have that unique insight. But what I will say is that you can oftentimes work with therapists that are very familiar with some of the characteristics of the relationship, like codependency or toxic emotions or toxicity of the relationship, or abuse, just being aware of what abuse is and the power and control that kind of comes with that. But anytime that you are seeking therapy for yourself, you should definitely have questions. You should want to try to consult with, most therapists usually have a 15-minute free consultation. So definitely have some questions ready to go. If you're well versed and educated on narcissism, ask questions about that and say, hey, I have a parent that was this and that and the other. And before you even go to that part, I should say that you would probably want to do a search on therapists that do that. I mean, Psychology Today has a search engine, or whatever platform that you use to look up people that have narcissistic parents. So you would want to try to look up someone who has specialty and or training in that area. But you can definitely ask about that. Most folks are not well versed on what narcissism is. They can just speak to what they're feeling. And I would say definitely try to spell those things out during your consultation and ask your therapist, what would you recommend, or what do you suggest, or how would you work with these issues, right? Because they should be able to answer that question there.
Right. And then it adds a little bit more of a complication to it, because as a highly sensitive person, you also want to get someone who's aware of the traits of being a highly sensitive person. But I think it would really have to come down to you assessing which need is more important than the other. And if you find a therapist that is versed in narcissism, then maybe they'd be open to learning about the highly sensitive person, because I do think that the approach needs to be different if you are a highly sensitive person, but sometimes you got to figure out what you need the most and kind of cut your losses on. I don't mean cut your losses, but know that something may have to give.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Jones, where can people find you? Tell us about your projects. Yeah.
My website is the best place that you can find me, drnataliejones.com, spelled out DrNatalieJones.com. You can also find my podcast on that same website platform, or go to adatewithdarkness.com. Date with Darkness is the name of my podcast. It is my baby. Ongoing this month, I have a Dangerous in Love feature where I talk all about the dangerous behaviors that people will see in relationships with narcissists. I just wrapped up episodes on gaslighting and ghosting, and I plan to do a segment on stalking and other things like that. I'll have my own featured blog on marriage.com.
That's a lot. You're really offering such a gift to this field with your knowledge and your expertise and all of the education that you're providing. So thank you so much for the hard work that you're doing. You're really making a difference.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you're doing with highly sensitive folks as well.
Oh, well, thank you. Dr. Jones, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I love this conversation. It's just chock full of really good stuff. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. It sure was packed with great information, wasn't it? I really appreciate you being here today. Dr. Jones had a ton of resources, and I've listed all of them in the show notes. Because iTunes has changed how they want podcasters to list their information, I'm not able to put all the information in the show notes in iTunes. You can get anything you need at unapologeticallysensitive.com, including the show notes. If you're interested in working with me, I provide online telehealth to folks in California. I provide a free 20-minute consultation. We can jump on an online call and you can see what you think. You can have therapy from the comfort of your own home, your car, your office. You can be in your pajamas. It's really an amazing experience. I would love to hear from you. You can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com to get all the places you can find me on social media, Instagram. My email is there. I'd love to hear what's resonating for you. Are there topics you want to hear about? This show is really for you, the listener. So if you let me know the content that you're interested in, I'm really happy to provide that if I'm able to. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.